on the effective teacher. And I've just read the first article in the Reader by Herbert called Delivering the Promise, Empowering Teachers to Empower Students. So overall, it basically seemed to be about how to produce a good teacher. And it was kind of refreshing because it didn't just kind of blame the teacher for not being quality, but it sort of looks at all the systems around the teacher, like the government and unis, and the main thing of how they seem to define a quality teacher is, the key word is engagement. And this seems to be really important in terms of Indigenous education. Okay, so I'll just read you the first paragraph because it was really beautiful. This lady, Herbert, Gianni Herbert. I remember myself and my fear on that first day of school. I remember the feeling of abandonment I experienced as my mother walked away and left me there, a sobbing mess. And I remember the teacher coming and sitting down beside me on the bench, putting her arm around me and using my handkerchief. In those days, we all wore a handkerchief pinned to our shirt or dress, to mop at my face while she quietly talked to me about the books I could look at when I came into the classroom. I was easily seduced. But my abiding memory of that day was of a person who was kind, who wasn't about to leave me to wallow in my own misery, but who also knew how to capture my interest as a learner. Entering that room was, for me, akin to stepping into Aladdin's cave of treasures. I was captivated then, and I remain captivated. And Herbert goes on to talk about her experience teaching in Indigenous education. She talks a bit about here. Can I click on it? Yeah. In the 60s, when she graduated, she was saying that to become a teacher, you kind of had to be a responsible member of society, and society valued teachers, and that was kind of settled, that teachers were responsible and socially upstanding members of the community. Whereas today, are they valued? I don't know, how highly are we valued? I don't know, society. We get into our first Dyson quote of what a good teacher is. A quality teacher is therefore a learner as well as a teacher, and is primarily focused on facilitating quality learning in their students. Hence, it can be assumed that a quality teacher is a prerequisite for quality education. And I think it might have been in the unit guide, but somewhere I was reading how the most significant factor in a child's success is the pedagogies of the teacher. Don't know if that's true, but certainly quite empowering for a teacher to think that they're the most important thing. Okay, so today we need to raise the status of teachers. And to do that, we need to have quality teacher education programs. Well, not to raise the status, but to produce quality teachers, we need to have quality teacher education programs. So who are the teacher of the teachers? I thought it was kind of... She talks a bit about the unis, and her first sentence is, ignorance, whether due to a genuine failure to understand issues or a deliberate strategy to maintain the status quo, is no excuse for lecturing staff. So she's kind of like saying, well, if they're dumb or if they're mean, that's no excuse if you're going to be a uni lecturer helping teachers become teachers. And then this sentence, Universities fail their students when they employ academic staff who have limited or no classroom experience and let them be supervising teachers. And I kind of went, what the fuck? I hope, that better not have happened to me. Imagine being a pracky and your supervisor hasn't actually been a teacher. So she's making a point that I didn't feel need to be made, but maybe it does, who knows. Okay. So the unis have a job to produce quality teachers by having quality staff who know what they're doing. And then the schools that the young teachers go to need to have good mentor programs. So teachers who are really good and experienced, and principals. And Catley talks about the professional identity being a key factor in what makes a young teacher a good teacher. So principals and mentor teachers helping a young teacher to have a really good professional identity so they know what is involved in their role and they feel good about fulfilling that role. She talks a bit about the vulnerability of the young teacher and all the pressures that you're under. Okay, next page. Genuine engagement. Okay, so whose job is it? We've talked about the unis, we've talked about the schools, and now talk about the government and what their job is in producing quality teachers who know how to engage. We're going to talk a bit about what engagement means at the end. Okay, so this whole thing about closing the gap. So in 1990, I'll go down here, these guys, the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Education Policy, produced this document that said how Indigenous kids were underperforming in every area, and that's kind of like the gap. And now we have COAG. COAG is Council of Australian Governments, and these guys are kind of monitoring the gap. I think they're doing, a range of community concerns, including education, and their job is to report on how it's going. So closing the gap is kind of their mantra. And of course, this is great in some senses because we're trying to bring about positive change, but of course it also kind of sucks because it's now well documented that Indigenous kids are not doing as well. So this is contributing to a negative self-image, which is of course detrimental to their education. So we just need to be kind of careful with the filters that we use. And this is where it kind of gets into our last unit, because the gap is based on NAPLAN tests and how valid is NAPLAN when you give a kid in remote Australia a NAPLAN test. And I found this heaps last year when we were assessing the Mauritian kids using American reading tests, and the vocab in the test was just completely foreign. So one question was like, Bob jumps 10 times on a trampoline, Susan jumps 3 times. How many more times does Bob jump? And the kid has never seen a trampoline. So the kid's like, what the hell is a trampoline? I don't get this question at all. So NAPLAN, of course, is fraught with language and contextual stuff that is not going to suit people who are outside of mainstream Australia. And I know NAPLAN tries to address that, but of course it's a standardised test, so it's always going to be thwart. I'll read this couple of paragraphs under genuine engagement. Okay. So hopefully through mentoring and chatting with principals and whatnot, pre-service teachers, and as a result of their engagement with communities, so Indigenous communities, are likely to reach a point where they begin to question the very notion of closing the gap. This should be seen as a positive development, for it could suggest that the very act of engagement is beginning to influence teacher thinking, enabling them to develop real insight into how Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people perceive they have been positioned for failure within the Western knowledge system that underpins Australian educational services. So maybe the Indigenous Australians should design the NAPLAN test and then give it to everyone, and then maybe the results would be different. Okay, the acquisition of such understanding is critical in enabling teachers of Indigenous students to recognise the essential assimilationist nature of what passes for education in this country. I don't fully get that, but I think she's using that word assimilationist nature. Herbert, what do you mean? I think she's saying basically our education system is imposing Western values and Western knowledge system on everyone. So NAPLAN is kind of like the gateholder to success in our society. I mean, I thought assimilation also had positive connotations, but here it seems to be negative. Okay. I'll read the rest of the sentence. The essential assimilationist nature of what passes for education in this country. For it is only from this position that teachers, individually and collectively, can begin to comprehend the symbolism of the broken promise and the importance of changing their own discourse around Indigenous education from one of failure to one of success. And then it talks about we've got to empower Indigenous students and start to understand what they want from their education. So yeah, using your filters when thinking about the gap in NAPLAN. I'm still processing this. Okay. Page 4. Who is responsible? And again, Herbert, bless our love, is really focusing that it's not all the teachers' fault. Even though they're the front line, it's the government, the systems, teacher education, and everyone around it must accept some responsibility for the impact. And she's kind of saying, so really if you want to make a difference, you kind of have to go political, because it takes resources to produce teachers who understand engagement and have time to focus on engagement. She talks again about NAPLAN and the whole teaching to the test thing, how that's not really very helpful in any educational setting, but especially in teaching Indigenous kids. And you want to be spending more time on engagement, which is relationship and respect and getting to know kids and understanding where they're at, than having this goal of passing NAPLAN, which is not going to be a fair assessment anyway. Okay, this quote here kind of summarised the article in some ways. Research across all sectors of education has clearly demonstrated that Indigenous students are able to achieve successful educational outcomes within learning environments that are culturally affirmative and inclusive of their specific needs. And I think that's kind of like, we know that you've got to get to know the kids and make them feel good about who they are and understand how they learn. So there's this Dare to Lead website, which is for principals, which I think I have open here. So already 5,000 principals have joined up to this. Oh, here's our mate Herbert, Gianni, who's writing the article that we're reading right now. So these guys do all sorts of things for principals and schools to improve Indigenous student outcomes. And I think half the schools, they said 5,000 principals already signed up. I think there's only 10,000 principals in Australia. Not quite sure. Okay, go back to... Yep. And she talks about how